So hi everyone. So a warm welcome back. So today we will be talking about the recently concluded the Border Gavaskar Trophy between India and Australia. So as expected, it was a very tight series. So I have Paul Dennett with me. He's a cricket analyst and podcaster as well from Australia. So welcome to you as well. And
Thanks, Abtak.
yeah, and so let's kick right off. So the first question is generally, so when Australia were 2-0 down in the series, so everyone was saying it will be a 4-0 whitewash and something. So ultimately it came down to 2-1. So what are your thoughts on the Australian performance, like the positives, negatives overall? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when Australia was down 2-0, the impression of the series was that it had been an utter disaster. I mean, ultimately they did lose the Border Gavaskar Trophy in 2 Test matches, each of which barely lasted 3 days. So it was a very, very short space of time to relinquish any chance of winning back the trophy. But I think that the second half of the series then really did put into context a little bit of how well. Did sort of, I think, give a better impression of how Australia were. That win in the third test was really, really impressive.
Yep.
And then I suppose the fourth test was a bit of a a non-affair. But to come away from it 2-1 and to be able to hold their heads up high and say that they won the third test, they kind of matched India in the fourth test. I think that maybe in time it will be regarded as a pretty decent outing given how good India are, and that there's been lots of stats quoted that prior to this series I think India had only lost 3 test matches in 10 years, and you look at the personnel that they've got assembled. If I was to pick my greatest ever Indian side, especially for Indian conditions, players like Rohit Sharma, Virat Kohli, Ashwin and Jadeja would be in there. Shami would be a chance of being in there as well. And there's plenty of others in the side that are fantastic players. So for Australia to get out of there with a 2-1 loss, not too bad. But I do think that there are a couple of key moments, but none more so than the second morning of the second Test match when Australia, was it the second morning or the third morning? My brain's going a little bit. The start of the second innings. Yeah, the third morning when Australia, having had a lead of 1 overnight, were 1 for 60 odd and looking like they were, we're sort of thinking if they can get 200, it's going to be a really interesting chase. If they get 250 or above, they'll probably win. If they get 150, there's still a chance, but no one expected they'd lose 9 for 52 or whatever it was. And the manner of the shot making, the sort of panicky sweep shots and everything else. And then, and even that for India, still lost 4 wickets. I think the sense of missed opportunity will come. They'll say, we couldn't have played much worse in that second innings. And still India's margin of victory was only 6 wickets. I say only in inverted commas, but had they put together something in that second innings, then it might have been closer. And they had their opportunities in the first Test match as well, that they let things slide a little bit at various points there. That the lack of output from the tail was pretty significant for Australia. That you look in that first Test where India were 5 for 150 odd or thereabouts, something like that, and looking like they wouldn't get 5 for 250 odd and looking like they wouldn't get much more. And then Axar Patel hoisted them up to a total of 400, whereas Australia, once they were 5 or 6 out, were sort of almost all out straight away. So I think ultimately a pretty high pass mark, but it's always going to be coloured by how bad those first 2 tests were.
Yeah, so even I feel the same way. So if we talk about the Indian Test team currently, we have got Ashwin, Jadeja, and Aksa Patel. I think was a revelation with the bat in this series as well. So overall, looking at the Indian Test team, we know that they are very strong at home and they are also winning away now in Australia. They won 2 back-to-back series. So how do you see this team shaping up, the Indian Test team, like overall home and away conditions? How do you feel about this side?
Well, they're obviously super strong, and I think that their spin bowling is peerless, and in Indian conditions, it's fantastic. It's not as effective in places like Australia and England, but spin bowling never has been. But that's when I think the big key is that the fast bowling is now of a high standard, that without when you add Bumrah back into that side, Shami is a fantastic bowler, and Siraj as well. Those three, I think, are sort of the three leaders. Obviously, Umesh Yadav's a decent bowler as well, but I think those three in particular, you've just got a really, really strong bowling lineup. And then you look at the batting, Kohli and Pujara kind of had pretty decent series. I think that, a few question marks about them. Shubman Gill looks like he's a rising star. Rohit Sharma is really flourishing at test level. Obviously, Rishabh Pant being injured is a big disappointment. I think that he's a key player in the side, and hopefully, I know it's a little while yet before he can come back, but I think that he's really key as well. So I think that, this Indian side that's been around for the last few years, in my opinion, without a shadow of a doubt, is the best Indian side ever. And that they are, I think at the moment, if you're playing on neutral conditions, it's the big three, Australia, England and India, are that for a reason, that they would be favourites to beat anyone else. And I think that amongst matches between them, it's great that we've got this World Test Championship to look forward to, the final. It's a pity it's only one match. But I think it's going to be fascinating to see Australia and India in, I suppose it's neutral conditions, but it's probably closer to what Australia might like than what India might like at the Oval. But it's incredible that it's already sold out straight away as soon as, and I don't undervalue how, much Indian fans love their team, but it's great to see that even a test match, the first 4 days have sold out already.
Yeah, so regarding this World Test Championship final, so we saw an incredible finish to the New Zealand-Sri Lanka game as well, which made this possible actually. So, however, so regarding this, it's a neutral value. It's at the Oval, English conditions. So, who do you see starting off in as favourites, if I may ask you? So, between these two teams in English conditions.
I think it's very, very tight. I think I probably would have Australia as very, very narrow favourites, but only sort of 60-40, 55-45, something like that. I think probably Australia probably will be a little bit better prepared. I know that a lot of the Indians are going to be just coming straight from the IPL, although there'll be some probably Australians in that basket as well. I just think that the Oval often is kind of, it does offer some spin as well, but I just think that maybe Australia will be slight favourites, but I do think it depends on how the Australian fast bowling comes up. That Hazelwood has been injured on and off for a while. That's a little bit of a concern. If Hazelwood was at his best, that would give me, as an Australian fan, a lot more comfort. I think there's been a bit of criticism of Cummins' performance in this series, but I just don't think that the conditions were really suitable for him. I think he's going to bounce back to his best in test conditions, and it'll be interesting to see who Australia goes with as a third seamer. But whether it's Stark or I think Scott Boland would be very, very handy in English conditions as well. So I just think Australia are slight favourites.
Yeah, so regarding the Australian team, say in England, so I was seeing a few media reports that maybe Warner might play or might not play. So what are your thoughts as David Warner as an opener in England? So I don't think he has a very good record over there. So would you think of changing it, or you're cool with him opening?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting question. I think he's been on 3 tours of England. The most recent one was diabolical. He averaged 9.5, I think, and he played fully 10 innings. And of his previous 2 tours, I think one was pretty mediocre, but one was half decent. But overall, his record in England is very, very poor. So you'd sort of say that as far as the Ashes are concerned, if he's opening the batting for Australia in the Ashes and Stuart Broad inevitably is going to be there bowling to him, then he's a very fine player, so I wouldn't put it past him. But I think the odds would be that he's going to find it difficult. I've heard talk that they're saying maybe the World Test Championship will be his last Test match, which I find sort of kind of puzzling, that he's either, I don't think, good enough to be in the side or not. So I think there'd be a temptation to say, well, we'll have Khawaja opening up with Head, and then the rest of the batting lineup, 3 of the remaining 4 spots are pretty settled. Obviously, Labuschagne and Smith at 3 and 4, and Green at 6. I don't think that Hanscom's got a lock on his spot at number 5, though. So, I suppose if push came to shove, I would probably still have David Warner in the side for the World Test Championship final, yes.
Right, yeah. Okay, so before we wrap this up, because we are short of time, so just one more final question, because we have this huge debate about the Indian pitches and how it's all going. So personally, as an Indian cricket fan, so I find sometimes the home advantage actually doesn't give us much of a home advantage, because it is a bit too extreme. So, what are your thoughts on the Indian pitches and how it is like good for the game, bad for the game? So, what are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, so the topic that everyone loves talking about. Yeah, it's a good point that sometimes if you make the pitches too extreme, then you do lose that home ground advantage. My silly analogy is if I'm doing a maths test against Albert Einstein and the questions are what's 5 + 5, well, I'm going to do just as well as him. It's like you've got to have some level of something that really stretches them, and I think that the pitches that benefit India the most are those kind of halfway bit, kind of the average of kind of the final test with the type of pitches that we saw in the first three, where there's enough spin for superstars like Jadeja and Ashwin to extract spin from it, to extract great results from it, but maybe not quite enough spin for lesser bowlers to extract anything from it, and that's where India really has their advantage. Second thing, I think that although most people would agree that the first three tests were too much in favour of the bowler, as I said throughout at the time, they were at the very least very entertaining, and I couldn't take my eyes off them. It was something that I would say that it was something I was hoping that people who are only casual Test cricket fans watched, because they realise this is absolutely superb entertainment. It doesn't really, I don't think sport gets much better than that. I agree that it's a pity that they didn't go for longer, and it's a pity that it was so hard that we didn't see an enormous amount of batting from some of the really super talented batters in the sides. But then the fourth pitch, I just had no time for it all. I just find those types of pitches terrible. We had a similar one in Melbourne in the Ashes of 2017-18, and everyone was just aghast at that pitch. I remember that at the time Channel 9 was covering the game, and they were trying to do anything to keep. They were getting random people into the commentary box and focusing on the commentators just to try to drive some life from that game. And I think that's the sad thing, that that final Test match, there was a lot of interest in it, that with obviously the political side to it, and a lot of eyeballs were on it. And in Australia as well, that this time of year, with the football season starting, the cricket tends to take a very big back seat in February, March. It's always a pity that we tend to be in India at that time of the year. But listening to some of the mainstream radio, they were talking about the cricket as much as they were talking about some of the other sports after that third test. So I think a lot of Australians who might not normally have tuned in would have tuned into the fourth test, and they would have stopped pretty quickly, because it was just, I don't think it was very entertaining at all. So I don't think it was in the interests of the best health of Test cricket. And it does come down to, I think, a difference in philosophy that Australia has from the rest of the world in pitch preparation. I say this every chance I get, that for all the, Australia's far from perfect. We do a lot of things wrong, but I think the fact that our ground staff are encouraged to produce the best pitch that they can for the local conditions is really good. Now, people say, oh, well, of course, when we come to the Gabba, we get bouncy balls, but that's because that's what the soil there does. It's kind of, they're not accentuating it beyond what it should be. Now, this particular Gabba pitch that Australia and South Africa just had was too favouring the fast bowlers, but that's not because it was designed that way. It was just because the weather conditions were such that the curator kind of got it wrong. So I think the attitude behind it is significant. I think that the rest of the world has this attitude that home ground advantage means you do whatever you want with the pitches to advantage your side. And while I accept and respect that point of view, I just don't think that's in the best interests of cricket long term. And I would love to see some form of neutral curators, like we have with neutral umpires, to say, right, we are going to ensure that we don't see pitches like we saw in Ahmedabad ever again. And that the pitches in the first three Test matches, I think, were closer to what we should have had. But maybe they would have also said to those, okay, let's slow things down a little bit, so that rather than a 2.5 day Test match, we might get a 4-day Test match, and that there's a chance to, especially in the first innings, for the batters to shine. So I think that's something. And I think that the Indian side is so good that there is no need for these sorts of things to be done. You could look at it and say, oh, well, that's a compliment to Australia, that this supposedly mighty Indian side leading 2-1 looks at it and thinks, well, we really don't need to win this last test match because it's unlikely that Sri Lanka is going to beat New Zealand 2-0 in a 2-test series in New Zealand. Therefore, let's just prepare the deadest, flattest pitch we can to get a draw out of this and hold on to the series victory. I think that the Indian side is a better side than needing to do that. And I think it diminishes them slightly that's what the choice was made. And most importantly, it ruined the spectacle for the fans, that what was shaping as what had been such a wonderful series ended with a complete whimper, to the point where even I was kind of happy when the last ball was bowled. And I don't have to watch this anymore, which is a great shame given how good it had been up till then.
Yeah, so even I felt the same. So I think even the players shook hands 1 hour before the close of play and something. Yeah, even they were disinterested for that. Yeah. So it was nice talking to you. So we are everybody is looking forward to the World Test Championship final between these two sides. So let's see what happens there. And hopefully you all enjoyed this short conversation. So thank you for joining. See you later. Bye.
Thanks, Saptak. Pleasure to talk to you.